Nancy Van Schooenderwoert. I'm an independent agile coach, and I'm going to let my two other co-presenters introduce themselves. Brian?
I'm Brian Shoemaker. I work closely with Nancy. I do consulting for medical device companies and software quality processes and software validation.
And I'm Peter Stevens. I'm a Scrum trainer based in Zurich, Switzerland. And I have a focus on working with leadership teams, getting a little bit into medical devices, and my passion for the last 5 years or so, it's been about applying agility in a personal context, personal agility.
And we're doing this video today because I wanted to dig a little deeper into a topic that came up in conversation recently, where Peter was talking about the new Scrum Guide and how the positions, the roles, and the forces within Scrum reminded him about the separation powers in the US government and the way they're supposed to work. Specifically about the US government, we have the three branches: the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. They all have distinct roles, and it's not so much that those correspond exactly to anything in Scrum, but the separation is the interesting part. And Peter had some comments about Scrum and how it's evolved that I thought were interesting and would be of interest to us all. So, Peter, do you want to recap what your idea was?
Yeah, well, so first of all, the U.S. government, when it was founded back in, 1789 with the modern Constitution, that was really the first attempt at what we would call a Republican or a Democratic government. And the idea that you've got three different, roles in the government, and no one has absolute power over the other, and they exert checks and balances over each other. And that's something, when I first came in contact with Scrum, that was something that really, that really appealed to me. Because you had the product owner, and back in the day, the product owner was going to be, a vice president, a member of the, managing board of your customer's company or something like that. Then you had the development team who were like, 5 levels of management down below the Scrum Master, below the product owner, and a little bit scared, a little bit intimidated, and totally, very unable to protect themselves. But we did know that they were responsible for everything that went wrong in software development. And Scrum then introduced this concept of protecting the team and the Scrum Master, whose job it was to protect the team. Now, and what I really liked is this balance of power. And I remember my first customer for my first Scrum project. He was one of these senior vice president types, and he talked to me about sprint planning. Wish the team comes back with reality, and we wrestle, and we have all of our very intense discussions. But at the end of the sprint planning, we have an agreement, something that we can both live with, and then we have peace and quiet until, the end of the sprint, and that the sprint review is relatively, the team generally does what they said they were going to do. And he says, well, I can have chaos at the beginning of the project, or I can have chaos at the end of the project. I much prefer to have chaos at the beginning of the project. and so that was my definition of Scrum: conflict and then tranquility. Okay, moving forward. Now, with the new Scrum Guide, we no longer have this role development team. We just have, we have the Scrum team, which has got 2 special roles: the product owner and the Scrum Master, and then everyone else is just a developer. And so, my concern about the guide is that, by taking away this third role, by just having them be part of the team, that we've lost this kind of balance of power, this separation of powers. It's like, imagine the, what the U.S. government would be like if the Supreme Court had no authority anymore.
That makes me wonder if in the new Scrum pattern, do you see something being lost then by not having enough separation of those entities?
Well, one of the things I really liked about earlier versions of Scrum is that, it kind of defined enough rules and process so that you could come into a dysfunctional environment, and even if the person at the other end of the table wasn't very cooperative, you could still kind of shoehorn that into something that could be somewhat functional. And then over time, you could start filing on that relationship and building the trust and make the relationship more functional. Yeah. And right now, it seems to me they've tried to define, something much closer to the end state. What would you like to be? And say, okay, so they're, instead of saying, where are we coming from? They're defining, where are we going to? So I see upsides and downsides. And my concern is, especially if you're working in larger companies where, you don't necessarily have that common sense because you got too many levels of management between the people involved, that might be this protection of the team. The idea that the developers have an identity that might get lost.
That
Okay,
makes sense to me,
Yeah.
because I've seen situations like that too. When you first come in, there's a lot of, maybe even hostility, but at least a lot of feeling that us, them,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
understand our part, they don't, and we have to battle it out somehow. And what I always liked about Scrum and any kind of Agile really is that they make compromising okay by
Mhm.
keeping things above board, by the transparency. And then if either side, both sides, hopefully, if people work in good faith, the other parties eventually see that and they kind of tone down some of the us them
Well-
business. Like you're saying, it's what they tend to move to.
And
I
in
know
doing
this,
quality assurance work with an actual medical device company, I've seen these roles work very nicely with each other, where the product owner wasn't some high mucky muck vice president or whatever, but somebody who was working with the overall group, but whose responsibility it was to talk to those external medical representatives who wanted to have this or that or the other feature, so that she then could take those features that they were looking for and say, well, that could be broken down into this and this and this, and then run those ideas past the development team, who could then say, yeah, that'll take this amount of work or that'll take that amount of work. And so she could work that into the sprint planning. So she was doing that as product owner, whereas the person who was the scrum master was making sure to keep the beat going with the team, having those sprint reviews and demos and scheduling those and making sure that everybody was in line with that. And then working together with the two of those was a quality assurance manager who was saying, are we doing those things that are required of us to make sure that we have this all documented when we then want to release it? So there was a very good kind of a three-way balance of power going on there without anybody stepping on each other's toes.
What I think is interesting is this idea of the product owner is now much closer to the team and much more, what's the word, at eye level with the rest of the team. Okay, we don't have this big discrepancy anymore. Now, this has an advantage, and I think the reason why that's the case is because the collaboration is now much better. The downside of this, and again, this is the other concern, is you now have to delegate decision making into the team, into the Scrum team. Okay, before you had the product owner who, this was someone way up here who obviously had decision making authority. Now, that agile transformation has almost become more difficult because you're not just delegating the task, you're delegating the responsibility and the decision making about the product. And I think that's also, I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's made some things better and it's made some things harder. And
isn't that an element of Agile though, the shared responsibility?
That's the way Agilists prefer to work. Yes. With shared responsibility and getting the delegation into the team. Is that the way companies want to work? Is it the way large companies want to work? Is it easy for them to get from the way they used to be to the way that the Agilists would like them to work? I think that's the challenge.
Seems to me that, well, maybe this is blasphemy, but I would be tempted to use the earlier type of Scrum in certain kind of situations and the newer type of Scrum in others. I don't see why they would be so terrible.
No, I mean, I don't think that they're that different. I don't think that they're that different. And, I think this is where the passion, and the energy of the Scrum Master, back in the day, I thought one of my key skills was having a hard forehead to go, eyebrow to eyebrow with the product owner. And it's doable, but it's not fun. And I really, much prefer to have environments where I have a good collaborative relationship with the product owner. And I've had that in cases where the product owner is the chairman of the board, and I've had that in cases where the product owner is a business analyst or product manager who got promoted.
I see.
And so having a good collaboration is I think worth its weight in gold. And so I don't know, maybe we're worrying too much about this because, what we really want to have is this environment where people are working together effectively.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where the focus, I think that's where the Scrum Guide is coming from, is they're trying to focus on what's the effective collaboration, and not protecting us from the dysfunctional collaboration. On the other hand, a government really has to protect us from dysfunction. And so maybe that's the challenge. On the other hand, we could start talking about how most modern companies look like feudal hierarchies. And so maybe that's also where this is coming from.
Well, that was
Amen.
what the whole Enlightenment thing was spurred by, wasn't it?
Exactly,
The
yeah.
Enlightenment, and then our founding people in the US wanted
Value
to
games.
take those ideas and actually create a government on those principles.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
the thing that it's easy to forget now is that there were no countries at all existing on those kind of principles, that
Yes.
the individual should be respected and there should be some kind of equality of opportunity or equality of something
Mhm.
of rights by individuals. There were no governments founded on that. They were all, like royalty and those kinds of things. Very different
Yeah.
philosophy. So I guess Agile is a new
Yeah.
philosophy in that sense too.
And our system of government evolved and Scrum is evolving.
All right. Well, that seems like a
Okay.
good conclusion for our little discussion. Any
Okay, well, thank you for
final
having me.
advice you want to offer, Peter, or final thought?
I think the question which really makes Scrum much easier is to talk about what really matters. Because around that question, you can build alignment. Okay, and once you've got alignment on what really matters, everything else is much easier. Okay, and that applies whether you're doing Scrum or doing anything else. If you've got that agreement, among your stakeholders and then among the team, what really matters, that, as I say, it's just having a basis of alignment, things that you agree on, that just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay, well, thank you. And we'll wrap up now. Bye-bye.